Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Billion Dollar Banker podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Perrone, aka the Billion Dollar Banker. And today I'm really excited to have with us Larry Hagner of the Dad Edge podcast. I had the pleasure of being on Larry's podcast recently, and his mission is just really incredible. It's the Dad Edge is basically all about empowering men to live and lead legendary lives. He's had so many great guests on his platform. He's been on some incredible platforms himself. He's an author, which we didn't speak about before, of a pretty phenomenal book, The Spirit of Fatherhood book. And I'm really excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us today, Larry.
Nicole, it's so good to see you again. I see you on NCIS all the time, but yeah, it's so good to see you.
You know what? I get that a lot. I feel like I should get
Um,
like a little detective, like a little, play the role.
you
I
should. You really should. Yeah.
it's funny when I lived in Asbury Park for a while here in a condo, and like when my neighbors first saw me move in, they're like, are you a detective?" And I'm like, "I'm a banker." I mean, I feel like that's kind of close, right? I'm like doing forensics on people's income and assets, but that's about as far as it goes.
Yeah, I hear you, man. That's really funny. Yeah, when you were on my podcast, it was driving me crazy the whole time you were on. I was like, she looks like somebody. She looks like somebody, and that it was that person. I don't know her name, but it came to mind immediately. But
Yep.
she's beautiful though, and so are you. But
Thank you.
that's yeah,
Thanks
it's a
so much.
compliment.
I'm so happy to have you here today. We were talking briefly before we got started, and for the audience, Larry, his mission is so authentic. There's so much passion behind how he got started on the Dad Edge, and I know our audience is very diverse, wide ranging. But today's really going to be all about, in my mind, how you can take something in your life and turn it into something really great, whether that be a passion that you have for something in particular, or if that's, maybe challenging times that you've gone through in your life. So, Larry, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I think my story probably started when I was a kid, to be honest. So I'll make it very brief, because it's a long story, but I'll snip it. So my mom and biological father were married very, very young. I think they were about 21 when they got married. They got married in 71. They had me in 75, which means I'm going to be 30 this year. Thank God. I'm gonna be 50 this year. But
Wow.
they got divorced right after I was born, and he left. I didn't know who he was, and when I was 4, my mom remarried, and I had no idea that I even had a father before that. I actually thought in my little 4-year-old brain that moms go out and find dads, and my mom hadn't found ours yet. I was in preschool, so I knew what a dad was. I knew my friends had dads. I didn't, but my mom hadn't found ours yet. So first time she brought this guy home to meet me, I'll never forget it. Like, this guy walks in our house. I'd never seen a man before walk in our house. He was wearing a 3-piece suit. He was a white collar data software engineer. He had the handlebar mustache, the feathered hair, the briefcase. And literally the first thing I asked this guy when I shook his hand is, I looked up at him gleaming. I was like, "Are you going to be my dad?" And
Oh.
literally that's what I said. And I remember, I think I even heard my mom gasp, like, like when she said that, and he kind of awkwardly laughed, but I still remember it. And well, truth be told, they got married about 6 months later. I think my mom kind of took that as like a sign. She's like, "Oh my gosh, like maybe this guy is the one." And they were married for about 6 years, but it was a pretty horrific marriage. They got married so fast, and I don't think they really knew each other, but it was very abusive. He drank a lot. My mom drank a lot. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of hitting. Cops were called to my house because of neighbors would call the cops because my parents would be fighting so much. But he adopted me. That's why I actually have the last name I do. I actually don't have my biological father's last name. When I was 10, they got divorced. He left. I've never seen him since. In
Wow.
fact, I found out about 15 years ago he died, and but I hadn't seen him. He wasn't a part of my life. As
Mm.
the universe would have it, I met my biological father, very, very briefly when I was 12, and it wasn't on purpose. It was by accident, and just for the sake of time, I won't get into how, but we met. He was remarried at the time, had a 2-year-old son, another one on the way, and he only lived 3 miles from us. We had no idea. And I was overjoyed. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is my real dad. This is amazing.
Mhm.
This is awesome." And I called him dad right out of the gate. He came to all my little league stuff. I saw him every week. And then about 6 months later, he just sort of kind of like, we just sort of drifted. It was really, really weird. And I still
Hmm.
remember being 12, and I called him up on the phone, and I still remember where I was sitting. I was at my grandparents' house, and I called him and I'm like, "Hey, is everything okay? Like, I feel like something's wrong. Did I do something wrong?" Like,
Aw.
and I don't even remember what was said. I don't, but what I do know is that was the end, and my dad left again. And I really kind of just sunk into this dark hole. I mean, like, kind of gave up on school. I repeated the 8th grade. That
Mhm.
was a big turnaround though for me. I was an overweight kid though. Went to high school, went on to college, got my degree, landed a job in medical device sales, married my college sweetheart. But
Mhm.
my mom, in my teenage years and all throughout my childhood, she married 3 times total. But it
Mhm.
was just this revolving door of super toxic, abusive, party animal kind of guys that were just
Mhm.
horrific. So that's kind of like that was my experience of fatherhood growing up. So when I got married at 28 years old, I was like, oh my gosh, what is this going to look like? I'll fast
Mhm.
forward till I was 30. I
Right?
was in a Starbucks for a meeting,
Mhm.
and I was there with business partners. And who came walking in to get his morning coffee but my father, the one I hadn't
Wow.
seen since I was 12. And I remember being with one of my coworkers, and she saw this look on my face like I had just seen a ghost. And she's like, "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I was like, "Well, I think I have because my father just walked in here." And she's like, "What?" And she kind of knew the story since we worked
Mm.
together.
Mhm.
She's like, "Oh my god, the one you haven't seen since you were 12?" I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, Where is he?" And I pointed him out. I was like, "He's right over there."
Wow.
And she's like, "Oh my god, what are you gonna do?" And I was like, I'm not going to do a thing. She goes, "What? You're not going to talk to your dad? You haven't seen him since you were 12. Like it's been
Mhm.
18 years. You're not going to talk to him?" I was like, "I have nothing to say to the guy.
Right.
No." So she just took it upon herself, got up, walked over to him, sat down, started talking. And I was like, oh my God, like what
Oh,
is about to
jeez.
happen?
Oh
And the
my
guy just
goodness.
very humbly walks over, shakes my hand, and he's like, "Hey, my gosh, how are you? Like, how are you?" And I'm like, "Fine.
Mm.
How are you?" Like I wasn't mean, but I wasn't nice.
You
It's
weren't
kind of
like,
like in
"Oh, I'm doing
between.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Funny to
yeah.
see
What'd
you
you get to
here."
drink?
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of
But
coffee do you
I,
drink?
yeah, is that white chocolate mocha? What is that? But
Oh.
I really just, you know, I I make my dad sound like a bum. He's not. He's a very successful entrepreneur. He's been married to the same woman for 45 years. I have 2 younger half brothers, but that interaction turned out to now be a 20-year relationship. So
Wow.
I, my dad and I, we've had a relationship for the past 20 years. So
Okay.
but how Dad Edge got started was I didn't know what to do as a dad. And I had this inkling that I was really going to fall on my face on it because I was just like, I have no clue what to do. And I did make a promise to myself that I'm going to be a good husband, I'm going to be a good dad, and I'm never going to hit my children out of anger.
Mhm.
That was my promise to myself. And when my 17-year-old was 4, I broke that promise and I spanked him.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I spanked him so hard that he lost his footing and he fell.
Mm.
And that, even though I've told this story 1,000 times, like when I tell it, I can still see the look on his face because as I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? And I went to go help him up and I went like to grab him like this, like, are you? And he like looked up at me and he just did this, like closed
Oh.
his eyes, like, please don't hurt me. And I was like, oh my God, I'm literally like, I just repeated everything I went through as a kid.
Ugh.
And that was it. That was it. And that's how this whole thing got started because and here's the thing. I'm no expert in this. I've learned a lot, right? But
Mhm.
this has been a learning journey for me for the past 13 years. And that's, I've been podcasting now for a decade, been coaching for almost a decade. And I wish I could say I have it all figured out. I don't. I'm still learning every day. But I wish I could say it's got started with a beautiful thing, but it sure didn't.
Well, I think that's the beautiful part about your story, right? It's the journey that you went on. A difficult situation in your life that turned into really like I would call it a passion project, right? There's something about something that keeps you in integrity with what you're saying and what you're doing when you're practicing what you preach and you're leading the way. And so, I think about that moment for you, like how far when you went through that with your son and you kind of were like, oh my gosh, this here I am. How long did it take you from that point on to say I'm starting the Dad Edge? I want to help fathers. I want to be better.
That night,
That
I
night,
uh
wow.
I literally went into my office and I was emotional because I was like, I can't believe I did that. And like not only did I hit him, but he fell like and I literally went on Facebook because that's what you do when you have a bad moment as an adult. You just distract yourself. You want to see other people's lives and not think of what you just did. And
Mhm.
But there was something really fascinating that happened that night. I saw in the left-hand corner, create a page. And I was like, I had never created a page. And I hit that button. So what do you want to name your page? And I just typed it out, the Good Dad Project. And I created that page not for a following. I mean, for crying out loud, it was 2012. And it really wasn't that big of a deal at the point. But I created that page because I was like, you know what? I'm going to go out and learn something new every day of what it means to be a good man, good father, good husband. I don't know what I'm doing. I know nothing, but what would it look like if I just learned? And I started thinking about other parts of my life. Like I was in medical device sales, so I was in the OR all the time, and I
Mhm.
was like, man, they trained us for 90 straight days before they even told us, you can now go set foot in the OR.
Mhm.
Like I did martial arts for about a decade. I think about that. You go to the dojo, you roll, you learn how to defend yourself. And what did I do to learn to be a better dad or a better husband? Absolutely nothing. And I
Right.
was like, what if I just learned one new thing every day?
Mhm.
And that's all I did. And then that page just kind of became my own personal diary of what I was learning.
It's
And
amazing.
I never did it for a following, but it just completely took off. And I was like, I don't understand this. Like, I'm talking about like how much I suck at this, and people are following me. Like, I don't
Mhm.
understand this. Like, don't they want to like, but I found out later on that that's what people related to, is that there's most of us are lost in that
Right.
area.
Right. That authenticity that we started when we started this, that's what stood out to me is your willingness to share. I mean, when you're on these platforms, I think that's one of the hardest things is to kind of open up and be vulnerable and tell your side of the story. And I think about our listeners and so many people that go through traumatic moments or experiences in their life. If there was a word of advice or some kind of input you could give them on what happened in that moment for you, how did you take that moment and not spiral and instead go into a place where you felt compelled to move forward? Like, what was that ingredient there?
Man, I have never been asked that question, but it's different now than it was then. For
Mhm.
back then, it was fear. It was fear because I remember, the guys that my mom married, and I remember the guys my mom dated, and I remember being hit, and I remember never wanting to be at home because things were so unpredictable, and there were so many like events of people drunk and toxicity and yelling and name calling. Like I never wanted to be home.
Mhm.
And there was a part of me that like it wasn't a part of me, it was a huge part of me, the majority of me, that did not want to repeat that. Like, but here was the thing. So for me, it was fear. I was terrified that somehow, some way I was gonna just follow that same pattern, even though I didn't want it.
Mhm.
And I I I I did not want that. And I thought to myself, going about this way, like I know all these things of what not to do, but I
Right.
don't know what to do. And it reminded me of something as simple as this. I just bought a brand new smoker from Lowe's,
Mhm.
and it's delivered, open up the box, here's the manual. The manual doesn't give me 100 ways not to put this thing together. It
Mhm.
gives me the exact way to put it together. And
Right.
I found that that was a missing ingredient. I'm like, I am doing all the things that I'm fearful of, that I don't want to repeat. And because I'm focusing on that, that's probably why it's happening. So what would
Mhm.
it look like if I were to create the future, design the future and the fatherhood experience that I want, versus running from the thing that I don't?
Mm.
And that was the launching pad for it.
That's deep. I was just listening to a Mel Robbins podcast, and she had a woman on who went through a really traumatic experience at a young age with her father, ironically. But it was really interesting how she spoke about how when you feel stuck in your life, or you're feeling that pain of something, it's really giving you a message, and the message is really like do the exact opposite, right? So if you're and that's literally what you did, right? You're like, I don't want to become that this thing that I'm scared of. This, and I feel like it's pulling me almost. I'm going to do the exact opposite, and so here you are now. So I would say for our audience, if you feel stuck, if there's something that you're telling yourself, I'm going to become a bad father. I'm not going to be loved. I'm going to, whatever that is, find a space where you could tell yourself, empower yourself with the opposite message. I'm going to be the best dad I can be. I'm going to be loved. Love is all around me. And I thought that was just kind of like, it was kind of like your agony does have a message for you. It's telling you the exact opposite of what you need to do. So just do the reverse. Think about the reverse, focus on the reverse. And I thought that was powerful. That's what you did in that moment. And so now today, you have an incredible platform. Can you tell our listeners, and I think about men in general, we've spoke about this, how there's kind of this mask, or this kind of this macho, like you can't really show that how you're feeling. And I think we got into this a little bit, but a platform for men to really come to learn about being a dad, being a husband. Tell us what you're doing today to help men.
So the podcast, I think, I always refer people to the podcast as like
Mhm.
that's your entry point, I think, for this,
Mhm.
because there is a decade of content in there for people.
Mhm.
Um, almost 1,300 episodes to date. So there's an arsenal of tools in there, and I think that's great for someone who wants to listen. But there's a next step too. We have two different platforms. We have a community for what we call our 9 to 5ers, right? And
Mhm.
then we also have a community for our business owners. What
Okay.
we've learned over time is that 9 to 5ers and business owners, just quite frankly, they have different needs when it
Mhm.
comes to fatherhood, when it comes to mindset, when it comes to leadership, and when it comes to marriage. And I'll just illustrate a few of them. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of people out there. Like I worked in executive level management, up the corporate ladder, and oh my gosh, there's a lot of energy, a lot
Mhm.
of emotion, a lot of stress that went into that. But I was also able to somewhat compartmentalize that, right? It's like, okay,
Mhm.
well, that's work, and like at the end of the day, like, yeah, yes, I care about it, but do I really care about it? To
Mhm.
some degree, it's a job, right?
Mhm.
When you own your own business, I think that that's a different mindset, because you're hunting, you're eating what you kill. Number
Mhm.
one, there's a lot of emotional
Oh
things
yeah.
that go into it, a lot of mental bandwidth, a lot of cognitive mental load that goes into that.
Mhm.
And we are high, entrepreneurs and business owners, man, we are freaking driven people.
Yeah.
And sometimes what makes us really successful in the workplace, that is not going to what's going to make us successful in the home front.
Mhm.
You've got to be a little different about that kind of thing. So we organize two different communities, and one is called the boardroom and one is called the alliance. And the alliance
Mm.
is our 9 to 5ers and the boardroom is our business owners. But what we do is we help men really in 5 areas. Number one is health, right? Health and wealth, I would say. Health of your physical health, your
Mhm.
mental health,
Mhm.
emotional health, and spiritual health, right? And spiritual health, it means different things to different people, and and that is what it is. We also help men with the relationship that they have with their wife, marriage. I mean, like I the statistics are terrifying. Like the divorce rate's 50%, but only 9% of married couples can actually say, I'm actually really happy.
Mm.
The other people that stay together are somewhat settled or completely disconnected. Like that's what marriage is. And that's horrible for men. It's horrible for wives. It's horrible for dads and moms. And it's not good for the family. So that's number two. Number three is parenting, right? Is how do I connect with my son? How do I connect with my daughter, right? How do I raise them? How do I balance discipline and love and all these different things? Like, how do I do this parenting thing well? Versus what most parents say is like they'll get to the end of their parenting journey or the end of their life and be like, holy crap, I wish I would have done it so much different. Just to kind of hit this home really quick, I just watched Sylvester Stallone's documentary on Netflix.
Oh really? How was
And
it?
yeah, and it was great. It
Mm.
was really fascinating. But the last 15 minutes of that, he talks about it. He's practically in tears. He's
Wow.
like, my family means everything to me. My kids mean everything to me. And he goes, I look at all these things like Rambo and Rocky and all these, like, I look at how they grew up and I'm over here making this movie. And at the end of the day, they're real people in my life. And this is an imaginary character to entertain people. Where the hell were my priorities?
Mm.
And a lot of people get tripped up on that. So one of our missions is you will not go to your grave saying anything like that. In fact, what we want for our guys is at the end of your life, you're smiling and you're like, it
Mhm.
wasn't perfect, but
Mhm.
man, I didn't leave a whole lot on the table.
Right.
I did it the best I could. I learned everything I could. and I did it well. So parenting is another one. Obviously business and career is another one,
Mhm.
and leadership. Those are the 5 areas we help men.
That's amazing. I think about, I keep saying this, the best person you're qualified to help is the person that you used to be. And
Oh,
I think that's such a
so
great,
good.
yeah, isn't that such a great saying? Because, you're looking back on, who you may have became, and what you turn that into. I just think that's such a powerful message. And then for men in general to have a support group and a place, because how you do one thing is kind of how you do everything, right? And I can't imagine that, 81% of people or 91% of people, right, are not happy in their marriage, right? To think about how are you successful in business and how can you prioritize your health and how could you be there for your kids if that part's not right, right? So it really is one of those things where you have to take inventory of everything. What's something that you learned through this process of having the dad edge and these training courses that maybe surprised you along the way?
That is such a great question. I've had so many, but maybe I could really lock this down in a
Hmm.
story. Um, there's a lot of things that we do in life that we're like, look at that, I did it, right?
Hmm.
Like if you hike up, like I love to hike and we love to mountain climb as a family. We've done a few 14ers, right?
Nice.
14ers meaning 14,000 foot summits, right? In Colorado or wherever you go. And you
Wow.
get to the top of that mountain and you're like, man, this took me hours. It took a lot of energy, but look at that. We did it. We're up here, right? It's
Hmm.
awesome. Look at the view. It's amazing. We actually did it. If you're competing in anything, if you have a new customer or if you got a promotion, you're like, look, I did it.
Hmm.
When it comes to this whole thing, I just wrote a book not too terribly long ago. It's going to release later this year. It's called Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. And the funny thing about it is the publisher I went through, the CEO, he's not married, he has no kids. And when I submitted the title to him, he's like, Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, why not just call it Legendary Fatherhood? I was like, because there is no such thing. He was
Hmm.
like, what do you mean by that? I was like, nobody gets to the top of the mountain as a dad and says, look, I did it. Look,
Hmm.
I'm awesome. Like I
Hmm.
accomplished it all. Right. But
Hmm.
there's the constant learning, the constant growth, the constant pursuit
Hmm.
of being better, being sharper, being more calm, being more patient, connecting with your kids. There is the constant refinement of it. And just to kind of hit this home again is that anybody who's ever done martial arts, they know this one secret. Black belt is not the finish. Black belt is the start. It actually is the
Hmm.
start. And you don't even realize that because you're chasing that black belt all day long. And when your instructor hands it over to you, he's like, congratulations, your training has now begun. And
Wow.
that's because everything you've done to get that black belt to learn has now got you in the mindset, the
Hmm.
spirit, and the body to now go pursue what it means to be a black belt versus, well, I'm a black belt now, so I'm done.
So it's like once you get there, it's not over. It's just beginning. Now you're at the top of the mountain. Kind of like how do you stay there? Now that you've kind of possessed the capabilities to be here, how do you not make sure you don't go back down that mountain in the wrong direction and you keep elevating, continue to grow. Well, that's amazing. I love that you're publishing a book. I think at some point, you get to this place where you have so much to share. And, obviously our listeners can go and check out the Dad Edge podcast and go through all those episodes, full decade, which is incredible. You wrote another book though called The Spirit of Fatherhood. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
I can. It's really fascinating, like about that book. So I've written four, two kid books. I did write a book in 2015 called The Dad's Edge, which was just kind of like it was just 9 skills that I had learned myself by falling on my face that I wanted to give to dads, just to so they didn't have to experience the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I wrote Spirit of Fatherhood. Have had Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood written for the past. It was supposed to launch in September of 2022, but it didn't because my publisher went bankrupt.
Oh,
So
jeez.
I have an agent, and she went and shopped the book, and Morehouse Publishing answered the call, and they said, "We like the book. We just don't want to publish that one just yet. We want you to write another book." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "We want you to write a faith based approach to fatherhood." And I laughed and I said, "You got the wrong guy." And I'm a
Mm-hmm.
faith based person, but I'm also newer to it.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, I said, I'm kind of newer to this. I was like, I've always been a faith based person my whole life, but strengthening that has only been in the past like 5 years. And they looked at me and they said, "That's exactly why we want you to write it, because
Mm,
we think that you can write this book relatable. You're not going to write this book preaching from a pulpit. You're going to write it,
right.
in the trenches." I was like, "That I can do." So
Mm,
the spirit of fatherhood, obviously there's a faith element to it,
mhm,
but it's also, if you really think about spirit, like what is the spirit of a dad?
mhm,
Right. And how does that come out? Like, how does that radiate out of me? What do I even do tactically? Right. Because men love tactics. How do I do this
mhm,
tactically? So that book is filled with stories, and it's filled with tactical things that men can do that leads them from the heart, also leads them from the mind, but also that they're a part of something bigger, if they agree with that, if they believe in that. And that is, we are our kids' earthly father, and we also have a heavenly one, right? And we
mhm.
can rely on him as dads. So that's where spirit of fatherhood is.
That's awesome. I saw someone tagged you the other day. They were reading your book, I think, to their kids. I was watching on your story. I thought
Yeah.
that was I was like, oh my gosh, now he wrote a book as well. And so, is that book something that you'd experience? You'd read it with your children, or is was that another book that I saw someone tagging you in?
No, I know what you're talking about. That's I wrote a kid's book,
Okay.
Screen Time, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And
Uh-huh.
that's for a dad to read with his kid about all the benefits of screens, but also the pitfalls and the things to watch out for with screens.
Hmm.
So yeah, but it's written
Oh
for
my
a
gosh,
kid.
everybody needs that.
Right.
It's hard to explain. Your kids are watching things now. It's first of all, it's hard for us to determine what's real or not anymore. Can you imagine a 5 or a 7-year-old on an iPad or watching YouTube, and they're who knows what they're starting to think. I think it's just so impressive what you've done. And I ask myself as I think about the listeners, being a dad, such an important role, being a parent, being a mom. I told you about the Mom Boss podcast that I was on, and then I was on the Dad Edge. I'm like, this is so cool. There's so much about parenting that we need to talk about. But I'm so impressed by what you've done in the podcast world too. And obviously writing books, becoming one of the top podcasts out there. Can you tell us about your journey in podcasting, and what advice would you give to someone that maybe wants to share their message? 'Cause I always tell people that, there's always something for you to share, right? And I love that your story is like, don't wait till you get to the top to start sharing. Share when you're on the bottom, share when you're going through it. That's when you wrote your books. That's when you started your podcast. You don't need to achieve some level and then share. You can start now. And so tell us about how it grew and where you've taken this platform to now.
Thank you for the question. I love the
Mhm.
question. So the podcast really started because I was a blogger, and the blog really wasn't getting a whole lot of wheels under it. Not that it really needed to, because I was really just more or less doing it for my own therapy and reflections and that kind of thing. Kind of like I was like, I don't really want to do this Facebook page anymore. I want to put it into something more official.
Mm.
And after blogging for about 2 years, I was like, I really want to have conversations, because that's where I learn. So I really actually looked at the podcast. Again, I never did any of this stuff for a following. I did the podcast because I wanted to talk to people smarter than me. And
Mm.
here I am 10 years later, and I'm still doing it for the exact same reason. I look at the podcast as like, I am not the expert. I'm just a host asking deep questions to extract the gold out of my guest, who's way smarter than we are, right?
Mhm.
In whatever area that they're in. And that's the way I've always viewed it. That's the way I will always view it, is that we're always learning. The cool thing about podcasting is I feel like I'm the student in the front row seat who gets to hear the message first, and I get to raise my hand and ask all the questions. And
Mhm.
I'm thinking about the audience as well, obviously, big
Mhm.
time, because I'm like, what would a man who's in his mid 30s with two little kids, his marriage isn't really where he wants it to be. What does he want to know from this guest? Like
Mhm.
what could help him, right?
Mhm.
And so I really view the podcast as like, I never want to be an influencer. That wasn't my goal.
Mhm.
I never wanted to be the guru. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted to be the student. That's it. So like, if I could give anybody any advice, it podcasting is a tremendous, tremendous learning environment for not only you, but for your
Mm.
audience as well. And if you do it for that reason alone, even, I think you'll be pretty darn satisfied. But if you look at the download numbers when you first get started, or,
Mhm.
your traction on social media, it's not where you want it to be,
Yeah.
it's probably not the reason that's going to be the one that's going to motivate you for a decade.
That's the biggest thing that I think, first of all, you resonate. That resonates from you. You could feel it. You could feel the passion in your message. And I think that there are so many people out there that have an empowering story, number one, but number two, just something that they want to share. And so I hope this is encouraging for you guys to hear. I mean, Larry has built just a really successful platform. Do you have, how many people are in your platform today? Like, are they all over the country? How could someone learn about, if there's a dad out there listening today and they're like, I want to get involved in this course. How do they get started with you?
It's super easy. I mean, if you go to the dadedge.com/mastermind, those are our two communities right there. You'll see everything that we do. Um, we, I have, I have 56 coaches that work for me. So we have about 50 Zoom sessions per week for dads
Hmm.
who are part of our ecosystem, just to
Wow.
help them learn. Every single month, we're teaching them what we call a new skills agenda. So, like in January, we help these men basically plan out their entire year in those 5 areas that I mentioned. In the month of
Mm.
February, it's all about the relationship with your partner, your spouse, your wife, whatever we're calling her these days. But it's helping every single month. We're helping them in a different element with very tactical skill sets, so they can go and do these things and they can enjoy,
Hmm.
their relationship with their spouses, their relationship with their kids, their life. A lot of men out there, it's safe to say, we are absolutely burning ourselves out. We're overwhelmed. We're kind of quietly miserable, and we're also living life alone, which,
Mm.
isolation is the enemy of excellence.
Hmm.
And men are physically surrounded by people all day long. But once we get married and start having kids, like our friendships, our relationships with other people outside of our family, they go by the wayside. And men live this quiet life of isolation and desperation where they desperately want like this better life. They're just not exactly sure how to get it. And the other thing too, and this showed up for me, is like, I don't want to ask for help. I don't want to be the guy that's like, I don't have this figured out.
Hmm.
And this is where what we tell you in our community: you're in really good company if that's what you're doing. We don't
Right.
have it figured out either, but we're
Yeah.
learning and we're teaching each other.
There you
And
go.
the cool thing about it is, yes, we teach our guys stuff,
Hmm.
but a lot of the gold really actually comes from the other guys there and their experiences too.
Right. I think that's some of the good things that you get out of group coaching, right? As opposed to
Yeah.
just maybe a one-on-one environment, as you get to hear from others. Can you tell our listeners, our dads out there, maybe one or two tactics that you think are the most valuable, let's say either in your marital life or in parenting, or maybe even both?
So I think, yeah, for sure. There's a lot of them, but you want to
All
talk
these
about
tactics
marriage,
are going through your head.
right?
Yeah,
They are.
let's start with marriage. What are a
Yeah.
couple tactics that you can give our listeners to maybe start to get that back on track? We have Valentine's Day around the corner. But hopefully you guys are planning
Sure.
already. But what are some strategies you can give them as just a little nugget or two here while you're here today?
So I think if I were to ask the question to men out there, or to wives out there too who listen to your podcast, um, you know, what are the three needs of your husband? What are the three needs of your wife? Most of us have, I ask this of all my clients. Pretty much everybody comes into my ecosystem, and you'll see guys do this. They'll be like, or you'll see women do the same thing. Well, I think he just, he wants sex and he wants this. And here they are. Your wife needs to
Hmm.
feel seen, she needs to feel heard, and she needs to feel safe. And there are a
Hmm.
lot of branches that go with those three needs. In other words, they're visceral, right?
Hmm.
But that safety button is a big one, and there's lots of different safety things. And a lot of guys are like, "Well, she's safe. Like she knows I'm not going to hit her or yell at her." That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is trust. There's a lot of other things
Uh-huh.
that go with that. So know that your wife needs to be seen, heard, and safe, right?
Mm.
Your husband, appreciation, respect, physical affection. Those are the three needs that he needs, right?
Mhm.
I'll give you a perfect example. When a woman comes to a man and she's talking, what we want to do is we want to start giving advice, because that's what men do with each other. That's actually what we want from each other. But really, what your wife wants is just to connect with you.
Mhm.
And all you really have to do is learn the skill of emotional validation and being a really good listener.
Mm.
And she feels those things, and the conversation goes deep for her and for you, right? The other thing too, the advice I would give women is literally, it's this simple. If your man comes home You don't have to have a warm meal and a cold beer sitting on the table, but if you just sit there, if you actually just greet him, if
Mhm.
you go up to him, hug him, hold his face and say, "I'm so glad you're home.
Mhm.
Thank you so hard for working so hard for us," and give him a kiss, he might think for a second he's in the wrong house, but you are gonna make
What
that
did I do?
man feel on top of the world,
Mhm.
right? Here's the and you asked about parenting. Here's the cheat code for men out there. Your kids have the exact same need as your wife does. Doesn't matter if they're a boy or a girl, doesn't matter if they're 18 years old or 5 years old. Seen, heard, safe. If a dad can make a kid feel seen, if a
Mhm.
dad can make a kid feel heard and safe, you have become the most interesting, loving,
Mhm.
fascinating, I just want to do life with you more dad on the planet.
I think that that's the next book, Seen, Heard, and Safe. I
It's a great idea,
Yeah,
Nicole.
that's the next one. But no, those are, it sounds so simple. It does. It sounds like these are, knowing someone's needs, understanding what they are. I mean, similar to what we do in business, right? When you're looking to make a new connection, and that's a part of it, right? You have to understand the needs of the client, and you have to hear them out and listen. And sometimes in our day to day, we might forget these things, or maybe we're not as polished and at home as we are when we have our our work hat on. But those are really great tips. They really are. So I'm excited for our listeners to go check you out. I think you really gave us a ton of information here. We might have some wives that are can they get like Valentine's Day gifts for like a free course? I saw some of the testimonials you have from wives, like, you've changed my husband, he's amazing. So this is a plug if any wives out there want to give a little Valentine's Day gift. But I think we all need things like this. I think that that these environments where you can go to a group of people, express how you feel, try to evolve and continue to grow and learn. It's great. And you've had so many amazing guests on your podcast. This is gonna be like one of my last questions for you. How have you grown your following to the point where I think you've had Matthew McConaughey? You've been on some really great podcasts. I mean, tell our listeners, like, how have you who have you had on? How have you got them here? Where have you been? How are you spreading this message so effectively?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, but I don't know. The thing, I've never bought an ad.
Hmm.
Everything we've always done is organic.
Organic.
I've never boosted a post. I don't even know how to do that. But yeah, I've had Matthew McConaughey on. I've had John Bernthal on, who's the Punisher. I was on his podcast, The Real Ones, as well. I've had Nikki Sixx on from Motley Crue. I've had pro athletes like Greg Olson on. Um,
Incredible.
it's been really amazing. I'm not gonna lie. And sometimes I kind of have to pinch myself that this has all happened. But here's what I'll tell you. It hasn't been nearly as hard to get guests like that when you have a mission like this, because
Hmm.
even guys like Jocko Willink, who, he's one of the most decorated Navy SEALs on the planet, New York Times bestselling author,
Mm.
he told me after I interviewed him, I was like, "Hey, thank you for coming on the show." He's like, "Dude," he's like, "this is amazing for me." He goes like, "Everyone wants to know about leadership. Everyone knows about what it means to be a Navy SEAL. Everyone wants to know about task unit bruiser and all this other stuff." He's like, "If I get to talk about being a dad,
Mhm.
man, that's awesome." So
Mhm.
I think I think the conversation welcomes people in pretty well.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what maybe I can hang my hat on.
It's a good change in probably the day to day of what they're doing, whether it be acting or athletics, or, and I'm sure for you to be able to have that experience. So for our listeners out there, when you're thinking about the things that really drive you, that you really feel passionate about, as you go through your evolution in life, really, really dig in and figure out what is it that I want to learn more about. Maybe that's kind of where it starts. I want to learn to be better, and then fill in the blank. And so this has been such an incredible podcast. I think we've started with a lot of things that are so great in the new year for our listeners to get started with. We've had some health and some wellness and some dressing good, and getting down your emotional, all these 5 pillars of your life that you really need to take care of. So Larry, thank you so much for joining us today. And listeners, I hope they go over and follow you and learn how to be better at everything they do. And we'll see you around.
Thank you so much for having me. And by the way, for all your listeners out there, Nicole puts her heart and soul into this podcast. If you could do anything for her, go out, go leave this woman a 5-star review. She puts her heart, her soul, her time, her effort into this, and she speaks from her heart, and she's absolutely amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm going to reach out to you next for a review now. Thanks for
I'll be
joining, Larry. I know
happy
how
to.
busy you are. When you come to New Jersey, we'll do round two.
Would love to.
All right. We'll see you soon.